In this chapter, Winston dreams of his mother and sister, figures lost not just to time but to history itself. Through fading memories and imagined sorrow, he glimpses a world where love, loyalty, and sacrifice once had meaning. But in the world of 1984, such emotions no longer belong. Chapter 3 is not just a dream, it's a quiet rebellion of memory. Winston Smith's mind floats through layers of unconscious memory as he dreams of his long-lost mother. In the dream, she is silent and regal, her arms gently embracing his infant sister. They are submerged in a descending space, perhaps a well, a grave, or the cabin of a sinking ship. Through the water, they look up at Winston, their faces calm, holding neither blame nor fear, only a haunting awareness of their necessary sacrifice. It becomes clear, even within the dream's illogic, that their lives had been exchanged for his. What pierces Winston is not just the loss, but the stark contrast between their world and the one he now inhabits. A world where loyalty and love once had dignity, where tragedy was real, and where personal sacrifice held meaning. In waking life, those virtues have evaporated. In the world of the party, where emotion is regulated and intimacy forbidden, tragedy has no place. The memory of his mother tears at him because she had loved him unconditionally, even when he was too self-centered to return that love. Her loyalty had been absolute, rooted in a now extinct emotional truth. In the eyes of the dream, her eyes and those of his sister, Winston glimpses a sorrow that no longer exists. Sorrow with depth, not designed for propaganda, but born of genuine loss. This moment, though dreamlike, feels truer than anything else Winston knows. As the dream dissolves, another familiar vision emerges. Winston finds himself standing in the Golden Country, an idyllic landscape that visits him often in sleep. The sun casts long golden rays across an overgrown field. A path winds through the pasture, and trees stir gently in the wind. The scene glows with impossible clarity. From across the field, the girl with dark hair approaches. In one fluid gesture, she tears off her clothes and discards them with disdain. Her nudity does not arouse lust in Winston, but rather admiration. The act itself becomes an expression of rebellion, so careless, so graceful, that it seems to sweep away the entire structure of the party, the thought police, and Big Brother in a single moment. It is a gesture from another world, a time when freedom still breathed. The dream ends with the words Shakespeare on Winston's lips, a last sacred whisper of a cultural heritage now buried under surveillance and fear. Winston is jarred awake by a shrill whistle from the telescreen. It is 7:15 a.m. and time for the day's enforced calisthenics, known as the physical jerks. He stumbles from bed, naked, his lungs gripped by a violent cough, and hastily pulls on a sweat-stained undershirt and shorts. His body is frail, marked by a persistent varicose ulcer, a symbol of both his physical decay and the inner rot of the world he lives in. As he obeys the commands barked from the screen, the dream still clings to his consciousness, as if resisting erasure. The exercise instructor, a shrill, muscular woman displayed on the telescreen, leads the room in rhythm. 1, 2, 3, 4. Winston forces himself through the motions, feigning enthusiasm as required. Beneath the robotic movements, his mind continues to grapple with the fragments of memory that remain, those faint outlines of a life before the party tightened its grip. He tries to remember the past, but even his own history is clouded. There are no records, no photographs, no newspapers that remain untouched by revision. Only the dim recollection of sensations and images lingers. His mother's hands, a tube station crowded with frightened faces, the sting of dust in the air during an air raid. Winston recalls a particular childhood moment, descending a spiral staircase during a bombing, hand in hand with his father, his legs weak with fear. His mother followed slowly behind, carrying what may have been his baby sister, or perhaps just a bundle of blankets. He isn't even sure if the sister had been born by then. They had taken shelter in a crowded underground station, a makeshift haven during the chaos. There, Winston noticed an old man weeping inconsolably. His tears, reeking of gin, seemed almost like a spiritual purging. Winston, as a child, intuitively understood that some irreversible betrayal had occurred, and the man's grief was too deep for words. But what was the betrayal? Whom had they trusted that they shouldn't have? The clarity of that moment has vanished. In a world governed by the party, such answers are smothered by the sheer absence of records. History is a blank slate, written and rewritten at will. Since that time, war has never ended, not in Winston's memory. Though technically not always the same war, conflict has remained a constant backdrop. Alliances shift, but the propaganda remains static. The current enemy is the eternal enemy. In the present, Oceania is at war with Eurasia and allied with Eastasia. 4 years ago, it was the opposite, but such facts cannot be spoken. The party denies the past, and the people comply. The official stance is the only permitted memory. The slogan says it all. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. As Winston endures his exercises, he reflects on the most terrifying aspect of this reality, not just the party's domination of the present, but its conquest of the past. If history can be rewritten endlessly, if truth is merely consensus sculpted by fear, then reality itself dissolves. What remains of the self when memory is dictated? This paradox leads Winston into the heart of doublethink, a concept so core to Ingsoc that it distorts even logic itself. To know and not know, to lie while believing, to reject morality while claiming its banner, to hold contradictory beliefs and remain unshaken. The ultimate subtlety is not merely to believe the lie, but to forget the act of believing altogether. Doublethink is not confusion. It is a systemized, institutionalized form of cognitive surrender. The telescreen commands them. Now it's time to bend and touch their toes. The instructor demonstrates, boasting she's 39 with 4 children, yet perfectly limber. Her words drip with both pride and propaganda as she reminds them to stay fit. For the boys on the Malabar front, another performative gesture for the party's endless war. Winston, gasping, forces his body down, pain radiating through his legs. For the first time in years, he touches his toes. The instructor praises him, but internally he is far from triumphant. The pain drowns out his meditations. The deeper realization remains. The past hasn't just been altered, it has been annihilated. There is no way to prove anything. No facts survive beyond what the party allows. Even childhood memories blur into fog. The legend of Big Brother stretches backward into myth. At times, Winston believes he remembers things, like seeing airplanes before the party claimed to invent them. But these truths float, unanchored. The party's control doesn't just lie in suppressing information, it lies in redefining belief itself. The chapter closes with a final humiliation. Winston is directly reprimanded by the telescreen for not bending low enough. The hot sweat of shame breaks out across his body, but he keeps his face emotionless. In this world, even a flicker of resentment could betray you. The instructor shouts encouragement as Winston lunges again, finally meeting the standard. But inside, his mind is churning, not just with the memory of his mother or the dream of the Golden Country, but with the horrifying certainty that in this world, the truth is not what happened. It's what the party says happened. In Chapter 3 of 1984, George Orwell invites the reader to drift alongside Winston Smith into a dream space where memory, loss, and emotional truth are still accessible. At the heart of the dream is a haunting image. Winston's mother and infant sister sinking beneath him into green water. Though the setting is surreal, a well, a grave, a sinking ship, The emotional clarity is piercing. They look up at him, not with blame, but with calm understanding. Orwell writes, "They were down there because he was up here." It is a moment of quiet devastation. In Winston's subconscious, their lives have been sacrificed so that he could live. The image is not accusatory, but mournfully resigned, suggesting a world that once allowed for silent heroism and unspoken love. This dream reveals more than memory. It reveals the absence of such emotional depth in the present. As Winston wakes, he is struck by the realization that the sorrow of his mother's death was tragic and sorrowful in a way that was no longer possible. The party's world has scrubbed tragedy of its dignity, reducing all human emotion to fear, suspicion, and shallow displays of loyalty. His mother's love, unwavering even in the face of abandonment, belonged to a world where privacy and devotion had value. She had died loving him when he was too young and selfish to love her in return. That line echoes with a rare human clarity, one that feels radical in a society that treats love as a crime and family as an afterthought. From this memory, Winston slips into another dream, one of the Golden Country. This field, golden and quiet, returns often in his sleep, representing a place of peace untouched by the party's corruption. Here, a girl with dark hair walks across the field and in a single fluid movement, tears off her clothes and throws them away. The act is not erotic but liberating. Orwell writes, with its grace and carelessness, it seemed to annihilate a whole culture, a whole system of thought. The gesture, simple as it is, symbolizes a complete rejection of the party's puritanical control. In that moment, she becomes more powerful than Big Brother, not because of violence, but because of unashamed freedom. As Winston watches, he feels awe, not desire, a reminder that what he craves is not physical connection, but spiritual release. The dream ends with the word Shakespeare on his lips, as if Winston's subconscious has summoned the last remnants of cultural richness. Shakespeare represents complexity, contradiction, poetry, and truth, all of which have been eradicated in Oceania. In just one word, Orwell signals the spiritual starvation of a world deprived of literature, history, and soul. And then, reality crashes in. The telescreen screeches at 7:15 a.m., calling citizens to the mandatory morning exercises known as the physical jerks. Winston's body, frail and coughing, responds automatically. He pulls on his clothes not out of modesty, but because the system demands it. The transition from dreaming to obedience is abrupt and cruel. Even while his body is no longer his, it belongs to the regime. During the exercises, Winston's mind resists. The memory of the dream still clings to him, and in his mechanical movements, he attempts to reach further into his past. But memory in this world is treacherous. There are no journals, no photos, no stable landmarks to verify the past. You remembered huge events which had quite probably not happened, Orwell writes. In other words, memory becomes isolated, true only to the self and therefore suspect. Winston's recollection of being led by his father down a spiral staircase during an air raid, of seeing an old man weep over some unseen loss, and of sheltering in a crowded tube station, is filled with doubt. Was it a sister or a blanket? Was it before the war or after? These are not mere personal uncertainties. They are the symptoms of systemic manipulation. Here Orwell introduces one of his most devastating insights, that when memory is no longer collective, it becomes dangerous. What Winston remembers cannot be proven, and what can't be proven may as well have never existed. This is not just a fear of forgetting, it is the fear of having nothing real to remember. War, Winston realizes, has never ended, but the enemies change, and no one is allowed to acknowledge it. The party has always been at war with Eurasia. 4 years ago, it was East Asia, but the narrative is rewritten, and no public or private record remains to challenge the lie. Orwell encapsulates this horror in the line, "If all others accepted the lie, Then the lie passed into history and became truth. This is where Orwell's warning grows loudest. Truth, he says, is not just at risk, it is being deliberately replaced. The concept that enables this is doublethink, a terrifying mechanism of mental control. To know and not to know, to be conscious of complete truthfulness while telling carefully constructed lies. Orwell doesn't just describe propaganda, he describes a state of mind where contradiction is survival. In this world, one must believe in two opposing ideas at once and erase the awareness of doing so. It is the annihilation of reason disguised as clarity, and it is not confusion, it is obedience. Meanwhile, Winston's body continues to obey. The instructor, cheerful and authoritarian, barks, "Let's see which of us can touch our toes." Her voice is full of patriotic pride. Think of the boys on the Malabar front. Even while instructing basic stretches, the body becomes a site of loyalty. Physical health is framed as moral virtue. But for Winston, touching his toes is not a triumph. It's another humiliation in a long line of submissions. He performs the movement, but inside he's grappling with a far greater ache, that the past isn't just altered, it's vanished. For how could you establish even the most obvious fact when there existed no record outside your own memory? Orwell uses this moment to highlight the core crisis: epistemological collapse. If you cannot trust your memory, and you are forbidden from trusting anyone else's, then truth becomes not just flexible, it becomes irrelevant. And when truth dies, so does freedom. The chapter closes with one last act of submission. Winston is called out by name through the telescreen. "Bend lower, please." The instructor corrects him, praises him, shames him, all while broadcasting to an invisible audience. Orwell captures the terror of being seen, and worse, of being expected to perform belief. Never show dismay, never show resentment. Winston keeps his face blank, though sweat drips from his body. In this final image, Orwell leaves us not with fire, but with silence. The truth is not what happened. It's what the party says happened. What Orwell builds in this chapter is not merely dystopia, it is a portrait of spiritual erosion. Through Winston's memories, his dreams, and his aching body, we witness the destruction of the very things that make us human: love, truth, memory, and even physical autonomy. Each of these is either rewritten or repurposed to serve the party, and yet, even within the despair, there is resistance. In Winston's dreams, in his memory of his mother, in the glimmer of the golden country, there is still a flicker of truth, a recognition that there once was something else, something better, something worth mourning. The lesson is not only political. Orwell asks us to remember that when we surrender memory, we surrender identity. When we surrender truth, we surrender freedom. And when we allow systems to tell us not just how to act, but how to feel and what to believe, we risk becoming ghosts inside our own lives. In the end, Orwell leaves us with a quiet, urgent call. Hold on to what you know is real. Speak what you know is true. And remember, silence may keep you safe, but it will never make you free. What Orwell builds in this chapter is not merely dystopia, it is a portrait of spiritual erosion. Through Winston's memories, his dreams, and his aching body, we witness the destruction of the very things that make us human: love, truth, memory, and even physical autonomy. Each of these is either rewritten or repurposed to serve the party, and yet, even within the despair, there is resistance. In Winston's dreams, in his memory of his mother, in the glimmer of the golden country, there is still a flicker of truth, a recognition that there once was something else, something better, something worth mourning. The lesson is not only political. Orwell asks us to remember that when we surrender memory, we surrender identity. When we surrender truth, we surrender freedom. And when we allow systems to tell us not just how to act, but how to feel and what to believe, we risk becoming ghosts inside our own lives. In the end, Orwell leaves us with a quiet, urgent call. Hold on to what you know is real. Speak what you know is true. And remember, silence may keep you safe, but it will never make you free. And perhaps now, more than ever, these words are not warnings from the past, but reflections of the present. We live in an age where truth is curated by algorithms, where the lines between reality and belief are blurred not by a central authority, but by our own online habits. The mechanisms of control are no longer crude or forced. They are invisible, personalized, and convenient. We scroll through endless feeds that confirm our views. We are watched, not by telescreens, but by apps we install voluntarily. And when lies are repeated enough, framed just right, delivered at just the right moment, they no longer feel like lies. They feel like common sense. To know and not to know is no longer a slogan. It is a way many have learned to survive. We praise freedom of thought, yet cancel those who think differently. We demand transparency from others, yet guard our own truths in curated silence. Doublethink is no longer imposed, it is instinctual. In this world, Orwell's telescreen no longer glows on the wall. It glows in our hands. It hears us, it tracks us, and more importantly, it predicts what we want even before we ask. And just like Winston, many of us go through the motions, touching our metaphorical toes, smiling for the camera, checking the box, while deep inside, something within us remembers that life was once more than this. But Orwell's genius is not in offering despair. It is in reminding us that resistance begins in small places, in memory, in questions, in refusing to forget. The party in 1984 rewrote the past because they knew one truth, that those who control history control the future. And so in a world where truth is fragile, memory is your rebellion. Where freedom is blurred, clarity is your weapon. And where silence is safe, honesty is your quiet act of courage. So let us not wait for a telescreen to scream our name. Let us speak before we are silenced. Let us remember before forgetting becomes a habit. Because the greatest danger is not that Big Brother is watching. It's that we've stopped noticing he's there. Winston Smith began his workday with a sigh that slipped past the ever-watching telescreen. A sigh not of rebellion, but of exhausted resignation. He sat at his desk within the Ministry of Truth, a gray and windowless world designed for the silent reconfiguration of reality. Before him lay 4 small paper slips that had arrived through the pneumatic tube, orders to rectify the past. Each slip, coded in terse, abbreviated language composed mostly of newspeak terms, was a command to rewrite previously recorded facts to reflect the party's current narrative. In his cubicle, surrounded by the cold logic of institutionalized falsification, Winston pulled the speak right towards him and prepared to begin. The tools were familiar, the speak right for dictation, the memory hole for destruction, the pneumatic tubes for transmission. The memory hole, a slit in the wall designed to incinerate unwanted records, stood as a grim monument to the systematic annihilation of history. Documents placed within it were whisked away by warm currents to unseen furnaces. What disappeared there didn't just vanish from the page, it vanished from existence, from memory, from truth. Winston read the 4 assignments. One involved correcting a misreported military forecast by Big Brother. Another required the alteration of economic data to reflect more favorable outcomes. A third demanded the erasure of a public promise regarding chocolate rations, which were due to be quietly reduced. The 4th message, the most complex, involved an order of the day that praised a now disgraced party official. Winston set this one aside to handle last. He retrieved the corresponding issues of the Times via telescreen and began his corrections. His task was not merely clerical. It was a form of state-sanctioned erasure, The past in Oceania was not a record to be preserved, but a field to be cultivated, pruned, and reshaped as needed. His corrections would be integrated into reprinted issues, replacing the originals, which would be incinerated. What remained would be the only truth, the truth as decreed by the party. Winston executed his work with mechanical precision. He adjusted dates, rewrote paragraphs, recalibrated statistics. The chocolate ration, originally promised to remain unchanged, was rewritten into a vague prediction of an upcoming reduction. Big Brother's mistaken military forecast was altered to match the actual outcome. Each completed revision was attached to the relevant newspaper, sealed, and sent back through the pneumatic tube. The destruction of evidence was as essential as the rewriting itself. Once the altered version had been sent, Winston dutifully crumpled the original slips in his notes, feeding them into the memory hole. The physical action was reflexive by now, a gesture so ingrained it barely registered in his consciousness. In this job, forgetfulness was not a failure. It was a requirement. Not only must the records change, but the very memory of the change must be lost. And yet, Winston understood the deeper irony of his labor. What he created was not even a lie, for lies imply the existence of an underlying truth. Much of what he altered had never had any connection to reality. Economic figures were inventions, propaganda masked as data. Boot production numbers, for instance, were absurd. Forecasts might claim 145 million pairs were produced. The revised figure could be 57 million. The real number? No one knew or cared. The point was not accuracy, it was control. In the endless noise of typewriters, murmured dictation, and the hum of pneumatic tubes, Winston worked beside dozens of others. He barely knew their names. Tillotson across the way hunched protectively over his own speakwrite. Others labored to delete the names of vaporized individuals, those who had ceased to exist. Still others rewrote poetry, sanitized historical accounts, or altered ideological tracks. Each cubicle was a cell in the greater organism of manipulation. The Ministry of Truth was a marvel of sinister efficiency. It extended beyond the records department to include vast wings responsible for books, newspapers, films, and television programs. Even entertainment for the proletariat was managed here. Lowbrow literature, sex-laden films, and fake music produced by machines like the versificator. A subsection named Pornosec handled pornography, created for the masses but off-limits to party members. All of it served the same goal, to keep minds dulled and obedient. Though Winston often detested the work, he found a strange satisfaction in the complexity of his forgeries. On occasion, he was assigned to revise the leading articles of the Times in Newspeak, which required a mastery of linguistic constraints. Today's more challenging assignment involved rewriting an entire article that praised Comrade Withers, a once favored inter-party member who had since been unpersoned. No trace of Withers could remain. Winston understood that a mere redaction would not suffice. The article had to be completely reimagined. The space left by Withers would be filled with something pure, heroic, fabricated. And so Comrade Ogilvy was born, an ideal party soldier, conjured from nothing. Ogilvy was everything the party revered: abstinent, zealous, obedient. From a toilless childhood to a martyr's death in service to the state, Ogilvy's fictional life was a monument to ideological perfection. Winston dictated the new article with practiced flair, employing Big Brother's rhetorical style. He described Ogilvy's sacrifice, his innovations in warfare, his celibacy, and unwavering discipline. There were no details too small. Even Ogilvy's recreational abstinence served as a testament to his devotion. In minutes, Ogilvy went from non-existence to historical fact, ready to be immortalized by propaganda and preserved in the archives. This transformation disturbed Winston, even as he executed it flawlessly. Comrade Ogilvy, a man who had never lived, now existed in the past. His deeds would be cited, his image manufactured, his biography memorized by school children. The past, once changed, became absolute. The falsified version was the only version. There would be no record, no memory, no whisper of the original. As he glanced again toward Tillison's cubicle, Winston suspected that his colleague might also be working on a replacement for Withers. Multiple versions of truth were being generated simultaneously. Eventually, one would be chosen, the others discarded, and the official narrative would solidify. Who made the final decision? No one knew. Somewhere higher in the ministry, unseen hands guided these choices. The mechanisms of control extended far beyond the documents Winston handled. They reached into language itself, into thought, into memory. In the language of Newspeak, the word unperson removed an individual not just from public records, but from existence itself. And as Winston erased Withers and created Ogilvy, he realized that this process, the invention of the past, was the true foundation of the party's power. The past, Orwell wrote, was not immutable. It was a battlefield. Whoever controlled the past controlled the future. Whoever controlled the present controlled the past. In Winston's world, truth was not discovered, it was declared. And he, like countless others, was its architect. Winston Smith began his workday with a sigh that slipped past the ever-watching telescreen. A sigh not of rebellion, but of exhausted resignation. It was a quiet sound, barely audible even to himself, yet it marked something deeper than weariness. It was the small exhalation of a man who carried the weight of manufactured realities and erased truths. This breath, though imperceptible to the regime, echoed with the sadness of surrender. There was no battle left in it, only the slow erosion of hope, chipped away by routine, dulled by repetition. Within the walls of the Ministry of Truth, Winston's desk became an altar to distortion. There, 4 paper slips awaited him. Slips that traveled silently through the pneumatic tube, each bearing a command written in clipped, coded Newspeak. They were not just clerical notes, they were blueprints for revision. One message required the correction of a false military forecast. Another demanded the revision of economic figures. A third involved the erasure of a broken promise about chocolate rations. The last and most complex dealt with a once praised official who had since vanished from favor. These tasks were more than administrative. They were acts of annihilation masked as administration. Around Winston were the tools of his trade, the speak right for dictation, the memory hole for destruction, and the ever-humming tubes for transmission. Among them, the memory hole stood out, a slit in the wall, unassuming and silent, yet deeply sinister. Anything placed in it disappeared forever, not only from the page, but from memory, from history, from existence. The past did not merely fade, it was incinerated, replaced, and forgotten by design. In Oceania, memory was not a sacred vessel, it was a battlefield. Each assignment Winston received became a quiet assault on reality. He adjusted dates, revised paragraphs, recalibrated statistics with clinical precision. The chocolate ration, originally promised to remain stable, was reimagined as a minor reduction. Big Brother's flawed forecast was transformed into visionary prophecy. The work was done without hesitation, without reflection. The revised documents were sealed and sent, while the originals were destroyed, vanished into flame and ash. It was a rhythm he had mastered, a dance of deletion that no longer stirred discomfort in him. And yet, deep down, Winston felt the ghost of truth lingering in his fingers. He understood the deeper irony of what he was doing. What he created was not even a lie, for lies imply the existence of an underlying truth. In this world, most of what he rewrote had never been true to begin with. Statistics were invented, forecasts were fabricated, history was sculpted to fit the present, not the other way around. The purpose was not accuracy, it was obedience. Reality itself bent beneath the weight of convenience. Within the endless hum of the records department, he labored beside others whose names he scarcely knew. Tillotson, just across from him, crouched protectively over his own speakwrite. Each man, each woman, existed in isolation, atomized within their own compartment of falsehood. Some rewrote poetry, others sanitized political ideology. Many deleted references to the unpersons, people who had ceased to exist in both body and record. It was an invisible orchestra of manipulation, each member playing a part in the grand symphony of control. The Ministry of Truth extended its reach far beyond the corridors of documentation. It spanned newspapers, books, television programs, films. It crafted not only facts, but the very air of entertainment. For the proletariat, there was low-grade literature, crude songs, erotic films, all produced by machines like the versificator. Pornosec, a subdivision, generated pornography for the masses, though such materials were banned for party members themselves. Every piece of content, whether serious or vulgar, had the same purpose: to keep the public docile, distracted, and comfortably numb. Strangely, Winston sometimes found satisfaction in the intricacy of his forgeries. One such assignment required him to rewrite an entire article that had once praised Comrade Withers, an inter-party official who had now been erased. A mere deletion would not suffice. A replacement narrative was needed. From that need, Comrade Ogilvy was born. Ogilvy, a man who never lived, was created with more care than some parents give to their children. Abstinent, loyal, militant, and zealous, Ogilvy lived a life of perfect ideological devotion. Winston invented every detail: his toilless childhood, his unyielding discipline, his glorious martyrdom. A full biography conjured from the void, sculpted for propaganda, ready for national memorization. What disturbed Winston was not the act of fabrication itself, but the permanence it imposed. Comrade Ogilvy, though fictional, would now occupy space in the party's official past. School children would memorize his name. Newspapers would cite his contributions. His image would be manufactured. He would become real, not in flesh, but in memory. Meanwhile, Withers, once a living man, would be reduced to dust, his trace annihilated. In Oceania, reality was not archived, it was declared. As Winston glanced again toward Tillotson's cubicle, he couldn't help but wonder if his colleague was crafting a rival narrative. Perhaps Tillotson, too, had invented a new hero to replace Withers. Dozens of stories might be competing in the shadows, each one poised to become truth. In the end, only one version would survive. The rest would vanish, their creators never credited, their content never acknowledged. Decisions of such magnitude were made elsewhere, behind higher walls, by invisible hands. This manipulation reached far deeper than the printed page. It extended into the very language people spoke. In Newspeak, the word unperson didn't just denote someone forgotten. It meant someone who had never existed. Withers wasn't simply gone. He had been uncreated. And as Winston deleted Withers and birthed Ogilvy, he realized that this act, the invention of the past, was the party's greatest weapon. For if the past could be rewritten, the present could be shaped. And if the present could be controlled, the future belonged entirely to the regime. As Orwell once wrote, "Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past." In this world, truth was not found. It was manufactured. It was a decision, not a discovery. Winston, like countless others, was not a historian but an architect of illusion. Every corrected slip, every incinerated page, every invented hero was another brick in the wall of unreality. And perhaps that is the greatest tragedy of all. For when memory becomes obedient, when language becomes a tool of limitation, when fiction wears the mask of fact, then freedom is not merely suppressed, it is forgotten. Winston Smith's quiet sigh at the beginning of his workday might seem insignificant, but it echoes through time like the whisper of a broken spirit. It was not the sigh of rebellion, but the exhale of someone deeply tired. Tired of pretending, of remembering what must be forgotten, and of helping build a world where truth is not discovered but assigned. Though the telescreen watched every movement, that small breath spoke volumes. In Orwell's 1984, freedom doesn't vanish all at once. It disappears in silence, in habit, and in small, invisible acts of compliance. At the Ministry of Truth, Winston's job was not simply clerical, it was theological. He worked in a gray, windowless office where reality was quietly rewritten, piece by piece, day by day. 4 paper slips lay on his desk, each one a command to rectify the past, correct a military forecast, alter economic data, erase a broken promise about chocolate rations, and remove all trace of a disgraced party official. These were not innocent tasks. They were blueprints for the construction of a new reality. His tools, the speakwrite for dictation, the pneumatic tubes for transmission, and the memory hole for destruction, served a single sacred purpose: to ensure that whatever the party claimed was true would become the only version of truth that existed. What Winston erased was more than words. It was memory. It was fact. The documents he sent down the memory hole were burned, yes, but more dangerously, they were forgotten. They ceased to exist not just on paper, but in thought. And with them, the people and promises they contained were lost. The past was not something to be remembered. It was something to be managed, cultivated, pruned, and reshaped as needed. And in this reshaping, history became not a mirror, but a weapon. The party understood that those who control the past do not simply tell stories. They mold the future. In Winston's world, lies were no longer lies. He understood the dapper irony of his labor. What he created was not even a lie, for lies imply the existence of an underlying truth. Much of what he changed had never reflected reality in the first place. The statistics were invented, the figures were fabricated, the forecasts were illusions dressed in data. No one truly knew how many boots were produced, how much chocolate was rationed, or whether the war was going well. And more importantly, no one truly cared. The goal was not accuracy, it was obedience. Not truth, it was control. Surrounded by the low murmur of other workers, Tillotson hunched over his speakwrite, clerks deleting names of the vaporized, others rewriting poems or sanitizing ideology. Winston labored in isolation. Each cubicle was a cell in a larger organism, one designed not to inform, but to pacify. The Ministry of Truth did not only handle facts, it manufactured fiction. Even entertainment for the masses, cheap novels, formulaic songs, erotic films, was generated by machines curated not for joy, but for distraction. The goal was not to inspire, but to dull, to keep minds numb, not alive. Yet amid the disgust, Winston sometimes felt an odd pride in his forgeries. On that particular day, he faced a more complex assignment: to erase an article praising Comrade Withers, who had been unpersoned. Simply deleting the article would not suffice. Something had to take its place. So Winston invented Comrade Ogilvy, a perfect party soldier, fierce, disciplined, loyal, celibate. Ogilvy had never lived, but within a few minutes, he had a history, a childhood, and a heroic death. And just like that, fiction became fact. Ogilvy would be cited in speeches, memorized by children, and praised in print. Withers, once real, was now non-existent. Ogilvy, once imaginary, was now eternal. This transformation disturbed Winston, for he knew what it meant, that in Oceania the past was not a stable foundation, but a battlefield. The truth was not protected by evidence, but rewritten by decree. As he glanced toward Tillotson's cubicle, he wondered if his colleague, too, had created a rival hero to replace Withers. Dozens of versions of the past might be created in a single day, but only one would survive. The others would be discarded, lost without a trace, decided by unseen hands somewhere higher in the ministry. There was no democracy in history, only verdict. The danger of this system was not only in what it erased, but in what it normalized. Language itself became a tool of repression. In Newspeak, the word unperson didn't just mean someone was forgotten. It meant they had never existed. This was the power of engineered memory. When even the concept of someone is erased, no one questions their absence. And as Winston completed his assignment, deleting Withers and conjuring Ogilvy, he saw clearly that this was the true foundation of the party's power. Not violence, but manipulation. Not force, but fabrication. And this is where Orwell's fiction becomes an enduring mirror. For the lessons embedded in Winston's quiet, desperate labor are not bound to a single dystopia. They stretch into our present moment. In an age where information moves faster than thought, where narratives are curated and attention is commodified, we too must ask ourselves what truth is and who is defining it for us. When information is controlled, thought becomes programmable. In a world where data is filtered by algorithms and agendas, critical thinking is not optional. It is a form of resistance. If we do not ask who benefits from what we are shown, we become passive recipients of a constructed reality. History, though unchangeable, is vulnerable in memory. If we allow ourselves to forget, or worse, if we allow others to remember for us, we risk losing the wisdom of the past. Memory is not only personal, it is political. To forget is not always to heal. Sometimes it is to surrender. Language matters. The words we use determine the thoughts we can think. When language is reduced to slogans, when complexity is replaced with outrage, when nuance is abandoned for simplicity, we begin to live in a world where truth is no longer something to seek, but something to swallow. Freedom is not the absence of chains, it is the presence of awareness. Winston could walk freely, yet his mind was caged. In our own time, freedom must be more than mobility. It must include the right to speak, to question, to remember, and to resist forgetting. And silence, in the face of falsehood, is not neutrality, it is complicity. Winston did not fight the system, he enabled it. We must learn from his resignation. When we see lies, when we witness injustice, our silence is not innocent, it is participation. Small compromises become large corruptions. It begins with the tweaking of a fact and ends with the invention of a life. Each step seems minor until truth has vanished entirely. We must be vigilant in the small things, for they are the building blocks of our collective reality. In the age of digital memory, forgetfulness is no longer natural, it is engineered. When search results are manipulated, when facts are buried, when history is rewritten through curated feeds, remembering becomes a radical act. Winston's story is not just a warning about the past, it is a lesson for the present. It reminds us that truth is fragile, memory is sacred, and silence can be dangerous. In a world increasingly shaped by narratives, we must become custodians of truth, not its consumers. And so we must ask, who is writing our truth? What have we silently accepted as fact? And what might we be forgetting, simply because someone decided we should? As Chapter 3 closes, we are left with the heavy silence of Winston's memories. Memories that the party says never existed. His mother's love, the sorrow of the old man in the tube station, even the changing shape of war, all are swallowed by the machinery of doublethink. In Oceania, remembering is rebellion, and yet Winston remembers. In a world where the truth is rewritten daily, perhaps the most radical act is to hold on to your own past. If this chapter made you reflect on how memory shapes identity, don't forget to like, comment, and follow the channel for more. In Chapter 4, we'll return to the heart of the Ministry of Truth, where Winston crafts a lie so perfect, it becomes historical fact. Don't miss what comes next, because in 1984, even fiction has consequences.